Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the worst card designs in the 1960s. Now, the fact that we've gotten back here into the 1960s means this actually would kind of make sense to start to bring hockey into the discussion, but I want to focus on, since I hadn't done hockey in the 80s or the 70s, I want to go ahead and do hockey as its own little look so that I can kind of get a little bit more into the hockey designs and then see how they equate over to the designs of the three main sports. So I'm going to go ahead and leave hockey out. And the main reason why it would make sense to bring hockey in is the fact that there's basically nothing in basketball. But that doesn't mean that we have a lack of cards, actually quite the opposite, because the 1960s had an unusually large amount of cards made. Unlike the 1970s, where basically, other than the Flir action cards, it was all tops. Well, here they had three different brands making cards all at the same time. They had Flir, along with tops, but they also had Philadelphia in football. And so that means that while there are only 2 basketball sets, there are 13 baseball sets, and there are 18 football sets. So there's more than enough to look at here in the 1960s. And the fun thing about the 1960s is the fact that there's so much design concepts coming out in this decade. They're playing around with things all over the place. And this is a time I would say that is the closest to the 1990s. I don't think that any other decade matched up as closely to the 1990s in terms of the creativity. The 80s had a lot of things that they were playing around with, but still, they were playing around with similar themes. In the 1960s, they were kind of all over the map, and that's part of what's really fun about this. It means that they made some really, really interesting cards. They also came out with some turkeys. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be looking at here, obviously, are the turkeys. And some of these cards definitely do hit pretty low. In fact, almost all of them do. So I want to start off with an honorable mention, as I normally do. And in this case, I'm going to go with 1967 Philadelphia football. Now, Philadelphia had done a really good job of making a very similar set year after year. So for 4 years, they were making little tweaks on it. And 1967 was kind of like a grand celebration where they were doing things from all the other sets before. But they forgot the cardinal rule of all the previous sets, which was to make sure that first and foremost, the design itself came through well. And in this case, it really didn't. The biggest problem the card has is it has a yellow border. The other 3 sets had white borders, which if done right is great. Here they went with the yellow border. And a yellow border can work. If you put your hand over the bottom of the card and look at just the top, it actually looks really good. The problem is that down below, they took this very rich yellow and they had a brownish orange for the text box, and it's an earth tone, which then reads with the yellow to make the yellow feel more like an earth tone as opposed to a vibrant yellow. Had they done a more bold color, not too bold, but especially if they'd done black, it would have worked really well with the yellow, and it would have made a nice enough contrast that the yellow would have actually carried. But in this case, it really it weakened the yellow, and it hurt the entire card. So the card itself just doesn't read well, not because of the yellow, but because of the accent that hurts the yellow, which is, again, the brownish orange box down at the bottom. And it's a shame because Philadelphia always had great images, and it really is too bad that they ended on this note. Also on the card back, they went with the brown card back, which also didn't help. So this card, basically, it failed on the front and it failed on the back. The reason I have this, though, as an honorable mention and not one of the bottom 5 is because Philadelphia had a very high bar. And this card is still a lot better than the cards that are coming up. It's not a bad card, it's a big disappointment. That's the problem. It is a big disappointment, but the images are still great and the border's pretty thin, so it works pretty well otherwise. So as far as the actual top 5 or bottom 5 as I'm looking at them, starting off with number 5, I'm going with 1963 Topps football. And this set it's like a clown show. What I was just talking about with the bold colors, under certain circumstances, with certain colors, bold colors work. There are other times when it doesn't work, and in this case, they used a bright red, bright blue here on this card that we're looking at. The way that they use these colors is the problem. It's not that they used the colors, it's the fact that they used 2 colors that are basically fighting each other. And so they're fighting a war, and unfortunately, the image basically loses out to that. It's collateral damage. And that's the problem with the card is it has a really good image. You can't really see the image. You're supposed to see the image. It does a good job of framing the image. It's just that all you see is the frame, not the image. And that's the problem I have with the set. It is a good card if you're looking at the card. If you're looking at the player, it's a terrible card. So that's really the failure that this card has. It also doesn't help that on the back, it has a light orange. I'm not a fan of that. I think that it really, the fact that the back feels almost bleached out, that's a big problem. So on the card front, it's too bold. On the card back, it's not bold enough. It basically fails on both sides. Now, I don't hate the card. It's just, it's a very mediocre card for this decade. The cards that I do hate are pretty much, okay, I admit the number 4 I don't hate. The other 3 I do. Number 4, I have 1960 Flir Football. And this card could go, this and number 3 could kind of flip places. It's ultimately the card back that makes the difference between the two, which I'll get to in a second. But the problem with this card is it looks like an old card. And I've always kind of liked it because of how old it looks, but it looks like a card from the 1950s to 40s. It's really more, if this had been done in the 40s, I'd have said, this is a great card. It wasn't done in the 40s, it was done in the 60s. Well, the beginning of the 60s. And there it looks old and dated. It's too bold. It's just these big bold colors. And there's like a little picture of a player in there somewhere, but it's these bold images. And in fact, it wasn't until I was working on this video that I ever noticed that that big trapezoid down at the bottom, the green trapezoid, it's a football field. It's looking down a football field at a goalpost. I never saw that in all of my years with these cards. I've never once seen that that's supposed to be a football field, because it just looks like a big block of color next to a big block of color. That's all this card is. So again, it's an archaic card. If it had been done in the 40s, I'd have loved it. But the moment that I realized it's supposed to be 1960, I hate it. In fact, here's an image of the 1960 Topps baseball card. This is a contemporary card. This is the contrast between these two cards, and that's the problem. Is the Flir is just too, it looks too old. It's too far behind. That being said, I do like the card back. Again, the card back looks old, but it looks like a mid to late 50s card back. It doesn't look like an old 1940s card back, and so it looks kind of archaic, but not archaic enough to where it seems ancient. It looks like a vibrant design from some time. That's what I like about it. So I actually really like the card back. I really do not like the card front. Now, like I said, this could kind of swap places with number 3, but number 3 is 1963 Flir Baseball. And in this case, it's that big box, the diamond, that is, I hate the thing. You got a big image, a really good image of the player, and then you got a white text box down at the bottom, which it has the information in it, but it has that big diamond with the color, with the player, the position in it, and it's distracting. And what's really interesting is the fact that there's nothing distracting about it. There's nothing to draw your eye. Your eye gets pulled away from the image down to nothing to look at down at the bottom. That's what's weird, and that's what bothers me. And it's primarily the way that the diamond is designed, how it cuts into the image above, how it's oriented at a 45-degree angle to everything else to really pull your eye, the amount of real estate that the yellow takes up. It's a design element that they threw on there that overpowers the rest of the card. And so I really hate this card for that reason. The image is actually pretty good, but the card itself is bad. And when you flip it over onto the card back, I don't get these card backs. The way that Flir was designing their card backs, I think is pretty terrible. I do, again, like the 1960 football. This one is just, this doesn't help it in any way. So that's kind of what I'm stuck with. Now for the next one, for number 2, I'm going with 1963 Flir again, but this time football. And in this case, this is a big letdown because I like the 61 and 62 cards because of the images they chose. Kind of like with Philadelphia. They chose really good images. In the case of Philadelphia, the images themselves are great portraits. Here, they're interesting. These shots have like practice fields behind. There's a lot going on in the shots, and that's what's really cool about these Flir images. In this case, the card itself, it fights the image, and it feels totally incomplete. Here you have a big red border. Great. But the problem is you've got a thin band of white border around the outside, which looks to me more like there was a failure in the printing process. They forgot to do something. There's supposed to be something out there, right? I think the answer is no. I think this is the way the card is supposed to be, but I don't know. but it doesn't feel complete. And then the text itself inside that border element is also white. So again, it feels unmoored, it feels kind of loose and incomplete. And then they have that little logo for the team. And I've never really liked those logos. A few of them look okay, but most of them look kind of kitsch. They look to me more like 1950s things for kids, not 1960s. And even in the 1950s, I still don't like them. They look old. But here, it's kind of like it's stuck on there, and again, incomplete because of that unprinted element on the logo. So there are pieces of the logo that are missing ink, which again, that's the design. That is what they were trying to go with these cards. It's just, it doesn't make sense in terms of just the way that I might be able to read the card. Whenever I look at the card, it looks incomplete, and I can't get past that. And that's why I really hate this card. The card back, it has interesting themes in terms of the color boxes, but again, Flir didn't put anything like statistics back there, so there's really nothing to look at. But it is a far cry from, to me, the worst design of the 1960s, which is 1960 Flir Baseball. And I find it kind of interesting that of all 5 of the sets I'm looking at here, 3 of them are 1963 and 2 of them are 1960. And on top of that, both 1960 Flir sets and both 1963 Flir sets are on this list. And this one is far and away the worst of them all, because this looks like it's almost like it's a reprint of something from maybe the teens. In the 1980s, there were some companies that were coming up that were trying to get a start, and they made cards that were similar to this, where it was all about, there's this old picture, check out this old picture. And for a company that doesn't have a start and is trying to earn their stripes, yeah, I can kind of understand it. But here, Flir is supposed to know what they're doing, and yet this looks like an archive set of recreating something from the past. The card itself is an image from sometime in the past, and they have these little photo album corners that they stick on the outside. That's basically what they designed it as. And then a little color box down at the bottom for the name. That's basically it. Now, this set could kind of get a pass that the football set can't, in that these are old players. These are from decades before 1960, so you are looking at retro players. And so in that regard, you could kind of get away with saying, it's old stuff. But in the previous year, 1959, they did something similar with a Ted Williams set that actually looks pretty good. I like how it looks. It looks old, but it looks good. In this case, it doesn't look good. In this case, it looks like somebody just figured out how to hit print on a printer and didn't know how to do any more design work than that. And that's the thing. I keep looking at it and go, wait, that's a professional card? It really is weird. And what's even worse is when you turn it over and look on the back, I really like the card back. Again, 1960 Flir, they knew how to make a good card back. They just had no idea how to make a good card front. So that's why I have this as the worst, because I really can't believe that they actually went with this as their main set. So that's my take. That's what I see for the worst card designs in the 1960s. Definitely let me know in the comments below what your take is on it. What you think should fit in here, what you think, if any of these should not be on, if something else should be. Definitely let me know. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, definitely do so. Check out my other videos. And thank you very much for watching.